I think the mistakes that brands make when they're trying to build a community is first you need to know who you are as a brand. And then you need to have a point of view. Well, what do you stand for? Right? So and then the third part is, are you truly adding value to these people you want to talk to? Let's call them community. And and when brands go into a space because they see the business potential, the business opportunity, and then they act incongruent to who they are, they they don't come in with their point of view, and they're mainly just forcing their product or their service down people's throat. That's when things break down.
I'm Eric Fulweiler, and this is Scratch, bringing you marketing lessons from the leading brands and brains rewriting the rulebook from scratch for the world of today.
Hey everyone, my guest today is Fabio Tambosi. He is the Senior VP of Global Marketing at ESL FACEIT Group. You might not have heard of ESL FACEIT Group. However, they are the largest esports business in the world, tapping into the unbelievably large market of gaming and esports. 3.2 billion gamers worldwide, 700 million esports fans. Fabio's background is super interesting. He now leads a team of over 100 people in 15 countries, 30 nationalities at ESL FACEIT Group, and he has been able to drive a 13% marketing revenue contribution in the 2 years that he's been there, up from 4%. So clearly what he's doing is working. His background, he was previously the CMO of Saucony. He led sports marketing at Adidas, and he spent a long time at Nike. So he worked in the football category. He also worked in the women's category. And a lot of what we talk about that I think is really interesting for people is how he has this, quote, unlearn mindset whenever he steps into a new role. And he talks a little bit about the process and kind of the rituals that he goes through to unlearn and remove biases from his previous role to make sure that he's coming with a fresh perspective to whatever he needs to do next. We talk about some of his learnings from working at Nike. We spent a long time actually in a really interesting conversation about how he approaches creative reviews. The short answer is he doesn't do them. And I think that it is a fascinating example of what I think more marketers need to do when it comes to setting up the teams around you to produce truly breakthrough work. We also have a great conversation at the end about some of the lessons that he's learned along the way, some advice that he's gotten from key mentors, a few of them that you have probably heard of. So great conversation. Again, we talk a bit about the esports and the gaming world because I'm just personally so fascinated by how big it is, but there's some real nuggets and pearls of wisdom here from Fabio's experience overall that I think anybody can learn from. So without further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Fabio of ESL FACEIT Group. Fabio, thanks so much for making the time. Been really looking forward to this conversation since we first talked about it a little while ago now, but I know you've been incredibly busy. I really appreciate you making the time. There's so much going on in your world. How are you doing? First of all, let's start there.
I'm good. Coming the end of the year, it's been pretty intense, fun, rewarding year, but I am looking forward for a good break.
Yeah, amazing. Well, I know we touched base, might have been over the summer, a few months ago now about the brief and what we're going to talk about. And I think you were still relatively new to the role, so I'm excited to hear the updates. And then I know one of the things that we're going to talk about in one of your kind of key perspectives that you're going to share with the audience is about kind of stepping out of your comfort zone into something new and bringing a fresh perspective to things. So I'm excited to hear about how things have gone now that you've been in the esports and gaming world for a little while. But before we get into the conversation that we talked about for today, let's start with the icebreaker question that we ask every guest. Can you tell us about a challenger brand that you're particularly passionate about right now and why?
I mean, it's a bit of a cliche thing, but I think Red Bull is the one that always resonates with me. I know they're a leading brand, but I still feel Red Bull have the challenger brand mindset, and they never lost that, and that's what makes them stay on top, right? They always find themselves uh, to be comfortable with disruptions and innovations. They go into spaces that they have never been. And what I love about their mindset as a brand is that they are a content first, content led brand. And in most of the time, you hardly see people holding the can and drinking the Red Bull. And it is all about engaging disruptive content. And I think the reason why I like to use them is because I feel like they created a market, they created an industry because they had a challenger mindset, and they lead that industry because they still have that challenger mindset.
Yeah. Well, I know we're going to talk about your experience at Nike, but one of my favorite quotes regarding this conversation is Phil Knight saying the best way to stay number one is to think and act like a number two. And I think they embody that for sure.
Exactly.
And they're also a great example of how we talk a lot about, and it's certainly my perspective, that modern marketing is about thinking and acting more like a media company than a traditional marketing function, because it's all about attention. And it's about creating relevant but differentiated content, experiences, communities that earn people's attention as opposed to expecting that you have it. And they've taken that to the extreme in a really good way. Literally, I think there is Red Bull, there's a media company actually around the brand. And so that leads to, some of what you were talking about, where it's not product promotion. It is genuinely, here is what we stand for, and we're going to create content around it. So before we get into talking about your background, now that's where we're gonna start chapter 1 of our conversation. But before we get there, can you give us a quick overview of Esports League, EFG Group? And actually, I wasn't quite sure, because I know, Rodrigo, who the chief commercial officer, who I've known for a little while, it was ESL, and then there's investment, and now it's a group. So give us the overview of the business that you're in, what it does, and where you're at.
Yeah, so we are EFG, ESL FACEIT Group. The best way I like to describe this is we are the leading global esports and gaming company in the world. And we are, the way we operate, we have a very strong vision, which is we create worlds beyond gameplay. So probably for those who are like, okay, what does that mean? Sounds like a mouthful, right? So everything that it's outside of game development, we create. So the tournaments, the leagues, online tournaments. So the way I like to describe, you talked about being a media company. Imagine if, ESPN and the NFL got together. So you're both the broadcast right holder, and you are the league organizer. We don't own the teams. We don't own the players. We work with them. And the core of what we do is build long-term strategic partnerships with publishers. Because the reason why they really like working with us is because we create a 365, 24/7 platform that people can engage, compete, interact with the game title.
And how long have you been there now?
It's gonna go around 21 months now.
Okay, amazing. Yeah, I mean, the esports, the gaming world is not something that I know too well personally. We did do some work as rival with Activision on the Call of Duty franchise. We had the CMO of that part of the business on the show, and it's just fascinating to me, particularly for people outside of the industry. Just the sheer scale of it is unbelievable, really, and you guys are the biggest. So really excited to hear a little bit more about what you're up to and how you're building the marketing machine around the business. But before we get there, let's take a step back. Let's talk about your background, the path that you've been on that led you to EFG. So I guess tell us your story. And the thing that I'd love to focus on that I found really interesting in our prep call was you talked about kind of the shifts in your career, going from working on football at Nike, something that you knew very well as a player, and then also as a professional, getting into the women's side of the business at Nike, and that being a really big turning point for you. And then going on to you were at Nokia for a bit, Adidas, Saucony, and now stepping into the world of esports and gaming. So tell us a bit of the story and I guess, unpack for us the significance of kind of those key turning points in your career.
So first, I like to describe myself as an accidental marketer because marketing was never something that I had as a career plan and dream. I mean, you and I talked, Eric. I grew up chasing the dream of becoming a professional soccer player. And I feel like I got a little bit of that taste. I got so close to it. I grew up playing at the youth academies in Brazil. Then I went to US, played a Division 1 college. 24 of my teammates in 4 years made to the Major League Soccer. I didn't. So that was a really big turning point in my life because when that ended, I lost my sense of identity. I lost my sense of self because I grew up identifying myself as, hey, I'm Fabio, the soccer player. And that was such a ingrained part of who I was that I was a little bit of a in a roundabout for about 2 years. Like I started working as a bartender, and then I decided that I had to go back to school, and I stumbled into one of those information sessions on for master's degree in Brazil in marketing management. And then I just fell in love with the discipline. And what I love about marketing is that we are truly the voice of the community inside the company, and we are the voice of the product and the company into the community, right? So I love that, like, we in marketing have the ability to really touch people's life, and I love telling great stories, right? So that's how kind of start into marketing. And then, I'm going to skip quite fast into a few things. I start first like with getting the traditional good job that my dad told me I had to get, and I was a pricer at IBM for 2 years. While I appreciate so much what I've learned at IBM about pricing, it was probably one of the two hardest years of my life because it's like, what am I doing? And then, I ventured into doing my own business. It was a sports marketing agency, sold the company, then joined Nokia. Nokia was my client, and then I had this opportunity. Then at that moment in time, I had a very clear direction that I wanted to go, that I want to become a truly international leader in the future. So my choices were very intentional. I have lived in 9 countries right now because I really want to understand marketing from a global context and truly getting the view of the world from a cultural perspective in multiple countries. Nokia did product marketing and marketing activation. Then came my dream, Nike World Cup in Brazil, going back to my home country to do the World Cup for Nike in Brazil. Phenomenal, phenomenal experience. And every opportunity I've learned something. In a Nike, what you learn is the art and science of storytelling. Nike is a company that they really live by the belief that the consumer decides. I've had experiences at Nike that we had an amazing idea, campaign ready to go, and it did not resonate with the consumers. We would literally walk away from it because we would not compromise what we do for the consumers. And there was a turning point when I was at Nike that you and I talked about. I was doing football. Then they asked me if I want to go to the headquarters in Portland. And I said, yeah. They asked, what do you want to do? I said, football. And then they kind of looked at me like, well, I think you should go do Nike Women. And I thought, I was like, well, you guys are trying to send me to Iceland and put me on like on a project that I know nothing about. I was like, what am I going to do there? Right? Like I I never wore a sports bra. I don't know what the women's challenges and problems and needs and wants are for sports apparel. And they're like, that's exactly why we need you there, because you're gonna ask all those simple questions that most people that been in that space don't ask anymore. So what that taught me is that whenever I start something new, I start by going back to the basics. And having almost 2 years in Nike Women gave me the training of mastering the fundamentals of marketing, because marketing to me is it's simple, it's common sense. Post Nike, I had a really good run at Adidas, moved to Germany with my family. Then I was leading sports apparel, some of the biggest campaigns we've done in Adi. And after Adidas, I moved to Saucony as a global CMO as my first CMO role. Incredible experience. Again, going back to working with Saucony, it's a performance footwear company that our purpose is we exist to make humans faster. And that goes right down to the hardcore endemic running community. So the reason I'm sharing this is because now where I am at EFG, even though I don't identify myself as a gamer, while I believe everyone is a gamer, um, I have experienced in my entire career the opportunity to work with endemic communities, like the hardcore football fan, the hardcore running fan, and when you boil down to its simplest form, you are connecting with human beings. What you need to do is to understand the basic needs, wants, and desires, and create a space for you to tell stories and put your brand in the middle of the community and let them play with it. And so that's where I am, EFG, 20 months in, steep learning curve. A lot of good things happen, a lot of big changes and impact, but I still feel a little bit resistance to change, because one of the things I can say, because I've experienced this with Saucony and also football, when you talk to an endemic community that they live and breathe and die for what they believe in, they're very protective of it, and it's hard to break it in and show there's a bigger world out there. But once you crack that open and you start adding dimensions to the brand that didn't exist, then that thing really blows out of proportion.
Hey everyone, just another quick interruption. If you're listening to this podcast and you're not already part of our AMP community on WhatsApp, would love for you to get involved. So AMP is a community that we started at the beginning of the business, really, just to kind of bring together some of the interesting people that we were talking to, the marketers that we were coming across, many of whom have been on this show as well. And so now AMP is about 300 senior marketers from around the world, from various categories, different stages, challengers, incumbents. And it's really a place where people can share questions, can share resources, can make new connections, can use folks as sounding boards. And for those that are in it, you know, it is a very vibrant community. It's really taken on a life of its own, which is amazing. So if you're listening to this and you want to get involved, please go to our website, wearerival.com. There you can find the application form or reach out to me or someone at Rival directly. Thanks so much. So I love the attitude of unlearning what you know, both for people listening who might be moving into a new category, a new business, a new role. But I also think it's a healthy and kind of important thing to do on a regular basis, even if you're in the same business or the same category or the same role. You know, it's actually why this podcast is called Scratch, because, you know, we're all about challenger brands. And obviously the connotation of challenger brand is disruptor, startup, doing things differently. But actually, to your point, I think great marketing, no matter what stage, what category, whether it's a next gen business or a traditional business, it's really just about the fundamentals done well. But done well means that they are fit for purpose for the world the way that it is right now. And we can kind of have this, this debt built up within us as marketers in the same way that technical debt builds up within organizations, where we just get so used to kind of putting layer on layer, and we end up in this place where actually we do need a fresh perspective, a healthy ignorance about what we're approaching. So I'd be curious, is there anything that you can share with our audience about, do you have like a process that you go through to kind of unlearn what you knew before and start from scratch with a fresh perspective? Is there like a set of principles or a ritual that you go through? Or I guess just more broadly for the people listening, if they feel like they want to go through a little exercise to kind of unlearn, go back to basics, remove the biases of where they've been recently, how would you recommend they do that?
Well, first, go in with a very open, curious mindset and very humble mindset, right? Like the faster you realize what you don't know, the more impactful you're going to become, right? So the way I do this, I come in, and this is something I've been doing for about 7, 8 years now. I created this concept called 90 by 90, which I talk to 90 people in 90 days across every single level of the organization. I spend a lot of time talking to the fans, to the consumers, to the partners, and I force myself to not form any sort of opinion and point of view within the first 6 months. And I've made a mistake in the past where I came in and inject change too fast, and then it became an unsustainable change. So at EFG, I came in with a different approach where I have not really touched anything, because also I'm very lucky. I came in with I inherited a high performing team that has been doing this for 10, 15, some people 20 years. So I didn't feel like I had to come in and fix anything. I had to come in and I had the time and ability to learn. And a few things I do is, it's crazy, and maybe for the traditional CMOs is going to be like, oh my gosh, like, I don't run creative reviews. I am the farthest away from the community. Who am I to know what works on TikTok, what works on Snapchat? So, I have to trust my team, and I trust them. And there are cases and situations that I saw some creative, I'm like, oh my gosh, I would have never signed off on this. And that was probably the best creative we've done that month, that drove the highest engagement. And that requires you having confidence to release control. And for me, this is a big learning, that if I can tell anybody who's listening, like, if you are on the top, it means you're the farthest away from the community. You are not the community. So trust your people, trust your team. Here's a quick story. We did a big brand refresh for ESL this year. And we're working with our agency, doing the creative process, creative tissue sessions, wall sessions. And then deep inside, I was like, it just doesn't feel right. It just doesn't feel right. So for the next meeting, I reached out to my creative director. I was like, hey, what is Gus doing? Gus is our intern. It's like, why? Well, bring him to the meeting. And this guy, like, he is incredibly talented, super creative. He is the consumer. And the beauty of Gen Zs is, like, they are unfiltered. So just sat in the room and picked things apart, and I'm like, okay, got it. Yep. Yeah. And we actually implemented what he told us. And I think you got to have that kind of, I call, humble conviction.
Mm. Yeah, I really like that term. So you have creative review meetings, but you're not the decision maker, or you try not to view a role as being like the yes or no.
We don't have creative review meetings.
Huh. So what does the creative process look like then?
So I spend a lot more time understanding the brief, the insights, the direction, what we want to achieve. Let's say I do have creative visibility, right? I don't go in blind and in the dark all the time. For big projects and important big things, I keep an eye on it. But, if I feel that we need to change course, I talk to the team and we get there. But we don't run creative reviews in the traditional manner. Like, I have creative visibility. Anytime I might want to see something, I ping the team, hey, where are we with that?
It's really interesting, and I'd love to stay on this for a second because I think it can be really helpful for people listening. One of the things that I think about a lot, having spent a lot of time on the agency side and a bit on the client side, is I think kind of the traditional or default approach as CMO or as the decision maker is to say yes or no, right? To try to get to the right idea, the right campaign, and then you put the green light, the rubber stamp on it. But actually, I think what I've seen in my experience, but also from actually conversations like this with, some of the most successful and effective CMOs in the world, is that they view their role more as setting the guidelines. That's out of bounds, that's out of bounds, and setting people up at the beginning with the right insight, the right vision, the right objectives, but then trying to stay out of it as much as possible unless something goes out of bounds. I'd love to get your reaction to that. Is that similar to kind of your approach?
Yeah, it's absolutely right. Like, you got to give people freedom, and autonomy. And I always say, like, there's a lot of like, oh, we need to empower the team. I'm like, I'm all for empowerment, but let's just establish the foundation that empowerment comes with responsibility and accountability. You want to make decisions, you got to be responsible and accountable for. And I let people but to me, this is exactly how you describe. Like, I spend a lot of more time spent in the beginning of the process
Yeah.
than in the middle and the end.
It's hard, right? Because you mentioned humility as the starting point for this unlearn philosophy, I guess. And it really takes a lot of humility and lack of ego to be the CMO or to be the leader that approaches things that way, because a lot of people, get their kick, their ego, psychological kick from being the person that says yes or no. So I do think that's really interesting. I'm curious though, because, we're talking about how you set people up at the beginning. What happens at the end? Like, if it goes well, amazing. Gus the intern, amazing idea, crushes it, great. What if it doesn't go well? Because you've kind of given people this autonomy. What happens at the end if it's something that has not been a success?
You learn. Like, I'm going to use something that my 9-year-old daughter told me a few weeks ago. She's literally, and I was like, whoa, where did you learn that? Where did you get that? She was like, Daddy, a failure is just an opportunity to learn something new. And I stand by that. Like, what I like to say, I said in the beginning, marketing is about common sense. Eric, we're not trying to solve world hunger. We're not doing brain surgery that if I make a mistake, you're just dead. So 99% of what we decide, it is reversible. And the beauty of today's marketing is that the marketing process is so iterative, and content is so fleeting, that tell me last time you saw a campaign that lasted 4 months. And the thing with the gaming and esports community is that the difference between traditional marketing and what's happening in today's world with the gaming culture is that traditional marketing, it's a passive consumption. You're there, you receive information from the brand, and you interact or not. Traditional marketing, it's about interrupting what you're doing so I can tell you something. Gaming culture, it's an interactive process. The community participates in the brand. So while you're dropping content and you're telling stories, they're streaming, they're co-streaming, they're doing watch parties, they're chatting on Discord, they're creating memes within seconds of when something happens, and they participate with the brand. And I think what I've seen in traditional marketing, some of the most legacy brands, is that they are struggling to understand that the control no longer is with the brand.
Yeah.
It's with the community.
Hey everyone, just a quick interruption to share a really exciting announcement about some new research that we have put out about the rise of microcultures. So as you know, we at Rival are all about understanding what are challenger brands doing differently to grow within categories that are being disrupted. And one of the biggest trends that we've seen over the last few years, and this comes straight from the brain of our Chief Strategy Officer, Lance Koenig, is that challenger brands are mapping and tapping into microcultures to drive relevance and talkability and ultimately growth. They have flipped the playbook, the incumbent playbook of top-down macroculture on its head, and they're doing really exciting and differentiated things. So if you want to learn more about it, there's a landing page on our website. There's going to be a link in the show notes here. Go read the report, listen to the limited edition podcast series that we put out with it as well. I think you're going to find it fascinating and really valuable. Let me know what you think.
I'm going to ask one more question on that, but because that was such a perfect segue into the next chapter, but I got to go back. Failure is an opportunity to learn, 100%. Is that an answer you can bring to your chief commercial officer, your CEO, your board when a campaign doesn't work? Have they bought in to that attitude, or is there a different way that you need to communicate these, learning opportunities, but things that maybe didn't hit the mark internally and up the chain?
I think managing the board, let's say the C-suite, it's about managing expectations.
Yeah.
And if the expectations are set in the beginning, you're constantly calibrating and sense checking. I say, like at my role, I come from a meeting that we're talking about a 3-year strategy and investment to a conversation about our social media strategy. So you kind of you float in like two spectrums of the corporate reality, and I think owning your choices, owning up to your choices and to your decisions goes a long way than when you're trying to over justify and defend a mistake. So to me, it's more about like, hey, this is bad, as long as it didn't cause the company to lose money or damage its reputation, it's all fair game, right? But because of this failure, this is what we learn 1, 2, 3,
Yeah.
and this is what we're going to do about it next time. That's all I can do.
Yep.
As a leader.
I think that's a really actionable takeaway for people. Really, you should be calling out what the learnings are in a win as well, but oftentimes there's going to be a little bit more pressure or something else that you need to say if it's a failure or not a win. But I think being able to specifically say, and ideally, this is how you're thinking about all your campaigns. We talk on this podcast in the past about like test, learn agendas. And I learned this from working with Amazon on the agency side. Any campaign that they had, there would be the targets, the objectives of the campaign, but they would also make sure that we as the agency had at least one hypothesis that we were testing with that budget and that activation. So I think that that's a really good thing for people to take away, is that whatever the campaign is, one, you should think about what can you test, what can you learn, but also if maybe the metrics aren't there, one of the values that you can still point to is what was the learning from this campaign. So I'm going to go back to the bridge that you teed up for me to get a little bit more into the world of EFG and esports. And, like I said before, it's not a world that I'm personally in, but every time I'm reading up on it, prepping for a conversation like this, the scale of it is just unbelievable. 3.2 billion gamers, 700 million sports fans. And really, like you talked about before, and I know it's something you're going to elaborate on, it's really a movement. You talked about kind of the interaction, the way that people relate to this sport is different maybe than some others. So I guess the place that I want to start is like, what has been different about stepping into, this role and this category that you've had to learn from the roles and categories that you had in the past?
So let me play back to see, for instance, like what did I learn coming into this role that I bring with me from my past experience? Was that the question?
Yeah, I would say, what is different about marketing in the world of esports than marketing shoes or cell phones?
Oh, what we talked about a little bit just before this question is understanding that it's an iterative process. It's about like it doesn't have to be as polished, as clean as, those beautiful campaigns and photographers you see from some of the big brands in the world. This is a lot more, it's called scrappy marketing. It's by being in the community, with the community, and it has a lot to do with co-creation. So you're co-creating with the community. They have to be part of the process. Otherwise, it just kind of drops on them, you know. And to your point, you said earlier, like, the role of the CMO is to say yes or no. It's like I call the Roman Empire, Julius decide whether you live or die, right? The thumbs up and thumbs down. But in gaming, this is not how it works. It's about iterative, it's about co-creation, and it's about participation.
And is that, looking back to your roles at Saucony and Adidas and Nike, is that something that now, with almost 2 years living in this world, marketing to this audience, understanding this kind of community and co-creation dynamic maybe a little bit more indifferently, is there something you would have done differently in past roles? Or is there something that you think people listening can take away and apply, even if they're not in the world of gaming?
Yeah, I think hindsight is, 2020. It's beautiful, right? Because you can look back, oh, I would do this differently. I just think, like, what's happening today is marketing. It's the right time and moment for this to be happening. If we try to apply what I just described back 10 years ago, I don't think it would have worked, because the consumer, the generation was different, the format of content was different. But what I can say is that the way brands and we are interacting, connecting, telling stories with this gaming community, it is applicable to any other industry. And I tell you why. Now, Gen Zs today, they represent 27% of the world population. They have some of the biggest spending power. So trust me, with 3.2 billion gamers in the world, 640 million esports fans, with 69% of them being Gen Zs, these people are most likely also consuming your brand, because they're not only consuming gaming, they are making choices about clothing that they buy, what shoes they're going to wear, what vacation they're going to take, what music they're going to listen. So finding the share passion points is the connective tissue between industries.
So Fabio, I know we're coming up on time. I think the last part of this conversation that I want to make sure we touch on, and we've discussed it a little bit, but I have a more specific question to ask you, is around community building. So, you've talked a bit about what that looks like in the world of EFG, and you've talked a bit about how working with creators kind of changes the dynamic of how a modern brand needs to go to market and even think of itself, the creator economy, putting the brand back into the hands of the creators. So I'd be curious, community is a term that gets thrown around a lot, but I think we can both agree most businesses and brands do not do it well. Where are they going wrong, and what should they be doing differently?
I actually had this conversation today with my creative director, specifically on this topic. I think the mistakes that brands make when they're trying to build a community is first you need to know who you are as a brand. And then you need to have a point of view. Well, what do you stand for? Right? So, and then the third part is, are you truly adding value to these people you want to talk to? Let's call them community. And and when brands go into a space because they see the business potential, the business opportunity, and then they act incongruent to who they are, they they don't come in with their point of view, and they're mainly just forcing their product or their service down people's throat. That's when things break down. So spending time defining who you are, what you stand for, and what is the value that you're going to create for the people you serve, which is your fans, it's your community, then you're in the game. If you don't have those three things in place, most likely you're going to have a hard time.
Hey everyone, just want to take a quick minute because we've actually heard from many of you that you want to get a better understanding of what it is that we actually do here at Rival. You know us for the content, obviously you're listening to Scratch right now, but everything else that we put out, the events, the community, but actually our core business, just so you know, we are a marketing consultancy for challenger brands. We partner with brands big and small to gain category share with a challenger approach. We develop and execute strategies and campaigns across 4 main areas of the marketing function: brand strategy, creative and production, paid media planning and buying, and customer data and MarTech. And then, of course, as you know, the mission that's wrapped around Rival is to understand and share our learnings about what drives the growth of successful challenger brands. That's it. Sorry for the interruption. I'll let you get back to the show.
Yeah, and I would argue those 3 things, to kind of a red thread of this conversation, really just go back to the basics of what good marketing fundamentals are. So I think that is a great way to kind of wrap up this conversation. Before I let you go, I would love to do a quick lightning round of questions. Can you first tell us about the first marketing job you ever had?
Yes. The first formal marketing job I had, it was I had a professor at the master's that I was doing in Brazil in marketing management. His name was Luis Fernando Lucas. And he had a brand consulting company in Brazil. And I was his student. And then after the term, he comes to me and he goes, "Hey, do you want to come work for me?" And he was teaching us branding. And branding is the discipline I love the most in marketing. Because it's about storytelling, it's about values, it's about all the things we talked about. So yeah, I was a brand consultant at age 24, and that's my first marketing job.
What about the best piece of career advice you've ever received?
The best piece of career advice is that, okay, here it goes. It's interesting because senior people used to tell me this in the past, and I'm like, yeah, of course you say this because you're already there. But the best job is the one you currently have. Don't focus too much in the future. Live in the present. Career is a journey, and for sure, it is not a linear trajectory. So
Totally agree.
yeah,
I had the same experience. I definitely could have used that advice. The other thing I say to people is like, think in decades, not months. Think about what is this stage, this 10-year stage, the next 10-year stage, et cetera. So I think that's a really good
What
one.
I like to ask people, like when we're doing career development plans or people reach out to me, it's like the question I ask says, Eric, in 5 years from now, if you're to describe what are you doing? I don't want to know the job title. I don't want to know the industry. What are the things you're going to do on an everyday that it's giving you energy and is making you happy? So describe that to me. And it's interesting because when you ask that question, naturally people are expecting you to ask, like, where do you want to be? They're like, oh, 5 years from now, I want to be a vice president. And then I want to have a team of X amount of people and I want to manage budget of this size. And I think that the shift in thinking differently in that way, like you said, is more about understanding the span of influence that you're going to have, like the impact that you can create for the business. And then naturally, then that becomes the level or the hierarchy or whatever that is. It's a default or a byproduct of that definition. And so that's how I also like to think, is like, don't think about tomorrow. Don't think about 3 months. Don't tell me what job title you want next year. Tell me how you're going to be feeling and describe what you're going to be doing in 5 years from now.
What about the best brand campaign that you've seen recently?
This is going to sound so bad, but like, sadly, it hasn't been something that like hit me really hard in a really good way since the Dream Crazy campaign from Nike. that it was like,
When was that? That was a while ago, wasn't
I
it?
think 2017. You know, you see a lot of like smart campaigns, you know, like, oh my gosh, that was cool, it was funny. But like, I like to think about like, like the think differently from Apple.
Yeah.
It's timeless, right? That's one of the things I've learned from my very last manager, Nike, Jesse Stolak. He would start our creative sessions or strategy sessions and say, hey, in 10 years from now, how do you want to be remembered? We want to create something that 10 years from now, people are going to be going, oh, remember that. So like, I always look for timeless pieces. And like, the last time I felt something so compelling and deep rooted and emotionally connected, it was the Dream Crazy.
Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, I always think about, you know, that there's so few things that we do as individuals, as CMOs, as brands that people are actually going to remember. And it's kind of depressing in one way because you're like, you know, really success or building a company or all those things is like a bunch of stuff that is in the middle of a few key decisions and things that you actually do. And so thinking about what are those headlines, that's kind of how I've always thought about it, is like, what's the headline? But actually how you described it, like what's timeless 10-year, that levels it up even further because you got to think about even bigger and bolder and recognize that there's a lot that goes into that, but there's a lot of stuff in between those moments that is just not going to matter as much. So
And
I think that's a really interesting thing
and
to
that, for
consider.
me, what I also like is you need to know where you are in the stage of the creative process, right? Uh, it doesn't cost you any more money to think big, right? You're gonna spend same amount of time thinking. Naturally, the creative process, the industry, the budget, right, is gonna naturally start to pull you down,
Yeah.
and then you're
You
gonna
got to
get to a
start
certain level.
higher knowing that
Exactly.
you're going to get pulled down. Yeah.
Exactly.
Mm.
So I tell my team all the time, my job is to shoot like so far away and put a lighthouse right there. It just give you guys enough light for you to get there, because naturally the course of the
Mm-hmm.
process is going to put us in a different place. So why not start with
Yeah.
thinking big?
It's really interesting because I think, you know, probably we both, but I even posted something on LinkedIn. I tend to not like call out other people publicly, but there's just this campaign in the Old Street Tube, you know, station. And it was just like so boring. It was just so boring. And I always think like, how is there so much bad advertising in the world? And, you know, we could spend a
Uh,
lifetime talking about why that is. There's so many different reasons, but a new seed that's planted for me based on what you just said is like maybe part of it, you know, I always think about the death of 1,000, you know, opinions and like the back and forth of the agency and everybody who needs to be involved, cooks in the kitchen, all that stuff. But actually maybe part of it is like they just started with aiming for something pretty good as opposed to something great. And maybe, you know, I'm always trying to think about what are the takeaways for people listening. Maybe one of the takeaways is like, wherever your starting point is for that next project, bump it up 20, 50, 100%. And
yeah.
naturally it will come back down a little bit, but it will end up higher than it would have been otherwise.
So if you go kind of almost full circle, right? Like this mindset I have is because I grew up as an athlete. As an
Mm,
athlete, you cannot go to the referee and say, hey, can I try that again? So you have to execute flawlessly every time. Of course, you're not going to do it the whole game, but you don't know when your next opportunity is going to be as an athlete. So the whole old say of like never leave the field feeling you could have done more. I bring this so much to my everyday at work because it's so ingrained in me as a person that I'm like, great work takes work, and bad work is gonna take more work because we're gonna have to
mm.
redo it. So get it done.
All right, Fabio, last question before I let you go, but probably the most important one. What is one thing people should do differently after listening to this episode?
Keep it simple. Simplify and go. Whenever you make a decision, just ask yourself, can it be simpler? Marketing is simple. It's all about common sense. Don't treat your audiences as customers because that's transactional. If you manage to turn them into fans and give them your brand as a platform for co-creation, it's you're you, you it's gold, right? But to me, it's like, keep it simple. Keep
I
it
love it.
simple.
All right, Fabio. Thank you so much for the time. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Yes.
Have a good one.
All right. Bye bye.
Scratch is a production of Rival. We are a growth consultancy that builds challenger brands, strategies, and capabilities to disrupt categories. If you want to learn more about us, check out wearerival.com. If you want to connect with me, email me at eric@wearerival.com or find me on LinkedIn. If you enjoyed today's show, please subscribe, share with anyone you think might enjoy it, and leave us a review. Thanks for listening, and see you next week.